Hello and welcome to another episode of Talk'n TRM, the podcast dedicated to travel risk management. Today I'm joined by somebody that I have got to know quite a lot over the last couple of years, and we were just reminiscing as to how that started. And I'm pretty sure it was to do with all of the ISO groups that we work with when we're talking about how we evolve the standards such as 31030 and looking at potential certification standards in this space. So we had a call for experts, and this wonderful lady came forward, and I've not really let her go since. She's now involved in lots and lots of things that we do. So without further ado, if I could ask you, who are you and what do you do?
So thank you for that introduction, Bex. And yes, that is correct. That is exactly how we met. And I suppose that's very often how these relationships come about. And I think my name is Elizabeth Anderson, of course, so I should say that in the first place. And I work for a company called Viasat. And I started off actually booking travel for my colleagues. And we didn't really have a risk management plan in place. And that's where my interest came into travel risk management, where it started, and it evolved very much in tandem with the actual booking process that I was involved in, and I find that has been really beneficial to the work that I do, and that's really where my interest in travel risk management started.
So starting with the bookings, which is kind of where I started in this space as well, Elizabeth. So we're kind of understanding the operational side of the travel. But then more and more we're seeing travel risk kind of come into that role. So, and some travel managers are kind of pushing against this. They don't want it. And I can kind of understand that on one hand. Other travel managers like yourself are saying, give it to me, give it to me, give it to me. I want to know more about this space. So talk me through why this space excites you and why are you so driven, because you are one of the most driven travel program managers I know to find out more about travel risk all the time. So tell us why.
Yeah, it's something that caught my attention immediately when I was given the task of developing the travel risk management plan for the company. And I suppose one of the reasons for that is quite a personal reason, in that I don't love travel or traveling myself that much. And therefore, I was really able to put myself in the shoes of my travelers, because I couldn't imagine that they love to travel so much either, although that is not always the case, and that brings with it its own challenges, of course. And really, it was the variety and the diversity that it brought to my role that I enjoyed most, because I really love travel. I love booking travel. So organizing the travel from the moment it starts to the moment that traveler returns, and any feedback that they have as well, was what really interested me, and being a part of that entire journey from the start to the finish, not handing it off to anybody else, but really having that responsibility. I guess one of the challenges there is that many travel managers will come up against is that they simply don't have the time. A lot of travel managers work very much on their own, and they have a very broad role, which incorporates expense, looking after the supplier relationships, looking after possibly even the credit card program. So all of that combined with the risk can be very difficult to juggle, because the risk part of it often requires you to step in at any time of the day, or could even be night, depending on the setup that you have. And that's simply not something that everybody can do. So it really depends on your setup, and the other supports that are in place are provided by the company. Yeah.
So let's just jump into that a little bit more. So talk us through your role. So what does a day in the life of Elizabeth look like right now?
So right now, I've moved on from actually doing the bookings in the internal team. We've outsourced that to a travel management company. I think that's set up that a lot of travel managers will know as well. And so now my role is very much in operations. I use the data a lot, so I really make use of the data that is available to me. So I'm involved in the relationship with the suppliers, but I also involved in the travel risk side, in that I manage the relationship with International SOS, and in tandem with that, use that data that is available to me, be it from Concur, be it from the TMC, and also reports that I have set up with our medical and security provider. So, really, my day involves monitoring what travel is booked ahead, and looking to see where I need to step in. It enables me to be really proactive in the way that I engage with my travelers. And having worked in the internal travel team, having booked directly for my colleagues, I got to know them. And of course, there are always new travelers to get to know. But in the main, I've really got to know who our travelers are, the type of travel that they're involved in. And that's a very important part of the whole piece, because having that direct contact with your travelers means that you know who they are, and then having the data to support that. When they are traveling somewhere, you can go back and check and see, have they been there before? What type of travel have they been engaged in? So I think understanding the profile of your traveler in many different ways is really helpful. So those are the types of things that I will look at, and I will also really look to be proactive in providing that information upfront ahead of their trip, so that people have that support while they're planning their trip. And it's very often things that they haven't thought of themselves. And therefore, I think being able to be proactive is a really important part of the whole process. Yeah.
So you're completely talking my language, because you're talking about data and how we can actually use this more effectively to find out some of the information that we need
Yeah.
to know when we're trying to keep our, well, our travelers safe, but this is about well-being and keeping them productive and efficient as well, isn't it? And I think it's very easy for us when we think about travel risk to always think about the high-risk destinations or high-risk activities, or you're going to a country that's potentially hostile to the type of lifestyle that you may live in the UK. But actually, there's a much bigger piece to
Mm,
this. And that stuff, a lot of companies are doing quite well. You know, if you travel to a high risk country, the chances are you know that and you know the risks around that, and you're already beginning to put stuff out there. Where we're not doing so well are in these perhaps what we would consider lower risk countries, or countries where we just feel people can just kind of get on with that, right? They're all adults. What I'm hearing from you, and I love this, is actually I've taken this time over the over the time I've been in this role to
yeah.
understand my travelers. So I'm not just coming in from a security head. I already know their dislikes and their requirements, which means you can perhaps talk to them on a more personal level. And I think this is one of the challenges that a lot of companies have right now is they don't know their travelers, and they are only necessarily understanding that piece when they're analyzing data, but it's so far removed from the travel
Mm,
itself, because
yeah.
perhaps they're analysts or they're travel management, travel risk analysts. They're not travel managers. And this is where I think there's such an opportunity for travel managers' roles to change and to evolve and to move us away from that quite strict procurement piece and vendor management piece to actually something a lot more well rounded.
Yeah, no, I completely relate to what you say, and you have really captured that exactly the way that I mean it. And while it's very important to be prepared for those high risk trips that travelers go on, very often they're quite easy to prepare for in many ways, because you know the expected risks, you know what to put in place in order to mitigate those risks. And it's just a matter of, putting that in place, and the traveler can go and remaining in contact with the traveler in that case, knowing what to do if anything does happen. But the ones that are can be very difficult to prepare for are the ones in the lower risk countries where something does happen. And they're often the ones that, are not prepared for. And I think, I'm very aware that anything can happen anywhere at any time. So I tend to see travel just as a risk in general. That's not to say that all of those risks are going to be materializing, but it just means that you're aware of them, and it enables you to prepare then in advance and make sure that you have the resources that you need in order to respond to anything that does occur. But I think that your point on the wellness as well is very important, because as you say, and I think this really comes into it as well, and it's very, that part is often also outsourced maybe to the HR part, and then the travel part is separate from that. But to pick up on my point, that part is very much fragmented. So what I try to do is to keep all of that together, um, so that I really understand the whole travel process in its entirety. And I think it's very important for the traveler to have a point of contact that they can contact at any part of the journey and know that they can be helped, regardless of what the situation is. In some cases, yes, you may need to refer them on further, and that's fine. But I think it's really important for you to be the point of contact who can do that with the traveler, and that they feel supported, whether it is wellness, whether it is risk. Um, I think that that's a, an element or a function that the travel manager, if possible, needs to be able to fulfill, to provide that end to end support. Yeah.
So with you, and I think for me, I see this as an opportunity, but that's because I love travel risk
Mhm.
management, right? And I get that not everybody does. And I think going back to your point, these roles, people are busy in these roles. It's not like travel managers are sitting there, not, they've got enough to do already before they start thinking about travel risks. So you can certainly understand. But I don't think it's about them taking full responsibility. I think
Mhm.
it's about them being that conduit, that piece that kind of starts. And that sounds exactly what you're doing, Elizabeth. You're not saying I'm going to take it all on, but what you're able to do is say, we need to pull some of these heads of department together. We need to talk to these other people, and I can be the conduit to do that. And I think I hope that's the evolution of a travel manager role, because you're vital and you're absolutely important. But if we think pre-COVID, pretty undervalued in most organisations, I think. Not
Yes.
respected perhaps as much as you could have been. Very much on the booking and the operational side of things and trying to sort things out. And then, of course, a big focus on trying to keep pricing down. Post COVID, the world sort of changed. Forget negotiation right now. There's no really point having a conversation about negotiating prices with the travel industry because they're winning, whatever
Yes.
you do. Um,
Exactly.
so the negotiation piece then comes from actually other pieces, so some of that softer stuff.
Mm.
And actually, when we start bringing in security, we shouldn't be negotiating on security, but you guys are so powerful in making stuff happen as far as the
Mm.
travel industry are concerned. Because if you focus on whether a hotel has, we talk about accommodation, but this goes across, but whether accommodation has certain things in place, you can actually really drive positive change. So you might, again, not be able to do much with rates right now, but you can certainly ensure your travellers are safe. For me, it's just a slight change of
Yeah.
nuance as to how we look at this. But it's not easy either, is it? So just to give people an idea, how many vendors, accommodation, ground transport, TMCs, supply, assistant suppliers. Give me an overview, approximately, of how many vendors you think are on your program, because I really want people to understand that if there is a travel manager in place, they are worth their gold. They're doing so much stuff.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it can be very difficult to quantify it, in that, it depends on the size of your hotel program as well, and also how you manage that. Are you negotiating the rates yourself? Are you outsourcing that piece? Sometimes that is outsourced, but many of the travel managers have that direct relationship with the vendors themselves. So it could be 100 different vendors that you're actually looking at least. In many cases, I would say that in my case, it's probably um, around 45 that I have direct contact with on quite a regular basis. If we're looking at the airlines, the hotels, and the other suppliers as well. so it's that takes up a lot of the time. And I think you're right in the way we look at travel management. You know, it's quite a traditional view that we have of it, in many cases, and I think maybe that's what really needs to change. And maybe the emphasis needs to be more on the risk side of things as opposed to on the procurement side of things. And to go back to your point about the negotiations, well, in some cases, of course, the travel manager has a procurement background, and but in many cases they don't. So maybe that's best left to those who are in procurement. And procurement is often a larger department, so perhaps that's something that somebody else can do. Whereas risk is something that is also very specialized. But it often sits very separately in the security function, which is very much to do with monitoring, watching where people are going, but you don't have that social interaction with the travelers, which is the piece that is missing. But as a travel manager, you're very often answering questions from your travelers relating to various different aspects of travel. That could be on visas, it could be on insurance, it could be on cards, payment, issues with the TMC. So you have the opportunity there to engage more personally with your travelers. And if you want your travelers to really respond to you, and to the messaging that you're sending to them, I think it's really important that you have that social interaction with them, that personal interaction, because a message that is sent out that is almost feels anonymous, travelers are not going to take that much notice of it always. And I find that by addressing the individuals, by tailoring an assessment or risk assessment to their needs, to their specific needs, taking into account, like I said, what they've done before, where they've been before, where they're going, whether it's a male or a female traveler, perhaps even, that is where I get the feedback from my travelers, and that's where I really engage with them. And it's this personal relationship with them that gets me the best feedback. Yeah.
And I get that it's difficult to achieve this, and
Mm,
I think maybe when we
yeah.
get to your top tips in a couple of minutes, maybe we'll kind of steer around to this, because
Mm,
maybe it sounds as though what you are being able, so something that comes up again and again and again for people is, it's not the technology, it's not I know what companies I should be using from an outsourced perspective. The thing I am struggling with is getting my travelers to listen to me and getting my travelers to use the systems that I've put in place. And again, we're singing from the same hymn book here. Yeah.
sing from the same hymn sheet.
Hymn sheet. That's it. But this idea of, well, unfortunately, whether you like it or not, the only way to kind of engage with people is about engaging with them personally. This blanket engagement that we all do when we're trying to implement a piece of technology. I get that an email's enough. Well, we've sent an email, so what do you mean that no one's understood? Well, they don't. How many emails do we all get a day and we just ignore because we've got
Yeah.
lots of other things that we're doing? So it sounds as though, and I wonder, because I want to just, I'm going to throw this back to you and say, what are perhaps some of your tips for engaging?
Mm,
But right at the beginning of this, you talked about, I don't actually like travel. I'm
yeah.
complete opposite. I do love travel. I'm really weird. And I realised this the other day when I went to Dublin. I was like, I love travel as I was skipping through Heathrow. But my partner hates it, loathes it, and
Yes.
extremely anxious about it. So do you think that because of your own honesty about this, that allows you to
Mm,
empathise more with your
mm,
travels when you're having this conversation and see things from a different way? Tell us a bit about how you, because it sounds as though you've almost hit the holy grail. Maybe you have, but I'm sure there's things you want to change within your program. This idea of having this rapport with your travelers and them understanding why you're doing what you're doing and that it's to help them.
mm.
This is good. This is where companies want to be, and at the moment there's a lot of pushback.
Yeah, I think really for me, it's just understanding like how that, that the traveler, you see a flight, you see a hotel booking, but there's so much more to it than that. There's like, if I walk myself through all those steps in my head, I just think, oh my God, that's so much stress. And then at the end of it, the traveler has to actually do their job and do it well, for the, that return on investment as well in travel. And I think by doing that, by imagining what they're doing, the trip to the airport, having to having to check in at the airport, having to deal with delays, that for me is something that causes a lot of anxiety for myself when I'm traveling. And I can't imagine, I suppose, in many ways that it's that much different for a lot of my travelers. And I suppose a lot of them don't admit that or feel able to admit that. And they just endure it very often. And so I want to be the support. I want to provide them with the support that I can. And I do get that feedback from them that, they're very appreciative of the support that they receive from me. And there you will always come up against challenges where there are travelers who are, they're just willing to travel. They love traveling. They want to be out on the road. It's excitement for them. And that's fine, but I still do the job that I do in the same way. I just don't necessarily expect the same feedback. And it really is a process that you have to work through, understanding how to communicate with your travelers, understand, what to expect, or, if you don't get feedback, it doesn't necessarily mean that your message hasn't come across. It's just going to be different with everybody. And that, I think, is also what tells me, that you do need that personal investment. However, I fully understand that that's not something that everybody has available to them, because it takes time, it takes resources, you have to invest in it. I didn't get here by, just reaching out to my travelers. I've invested in, training. The company has invested in my training. That's very important. And I really think you have to do that, because until you actually do the training, you don't understand exactly what you can come up against and how to deal with that. Who are the stakeholders that you need to work with as well? You mentioned as well about, working with the various departments. That's so important to do that. And you mentioned, before COVID, we really didn't have that visibility within the company, and our status was definitely lower. And we all know that. We all said that. And I think things have improved since then. But I think it's really important for people to be open about how to work together and how to support your travelers collectively, and that everybody knows their roles. You don't want to be overlapping. You don't want to be sending out information from different departments to travelers, because you want them to know where that message is coming from, and it should be consistent. So I think that's one of the things that you need to put time into, is to understand where that information is going to come from, how to be consistent about it, to develop a way to be consistent about how you do that, how you communicate with your travelers. Because once you have that in place, it's easier. You can always follow a certain way of communicating with your travelers. So you don't have to think about it from the start again and again. So in the beginning, that was something that I had a big challenge with, was trying to understand, how do I get the information across? And it was really, a matter of learning on the job and learning by making mistakes. So it's just something that you have to go through. There isn't just one way of doing it. And it's something you have to find out how to do that, how it works best, and stick to that to make your life easier as well.
I hear you, and I think that communications piece, we can't. There's so many different ways you can communicate, right? I think it in our minds we think we'll just send out a blanket email, like I said earlier, and that will just cover everything off. But actually, there's so much more than this. There's ways that you can engage with workshops, you can have training, you can
Mm,
have almost a. We used to sort of do a sort of show and tell with some of the suppliers, so
yeah,
people could begin to feel a little bit more that they understood the program. And it's about shifting it, isn't it? It's about shifting in people's minds from this is just something I have to do in order to get my job done, to understand this is actually something that's important. And if I get this right, it's going to enhance the way I do my job,
yes,
and it's going to make everything a lot less stressful. but I'm also going to understand that things probably will go wrong at some point, if nothing else than just delays, because we're living in a fairly turbulent time as far as travel is concerned right now. But how can I then prepare myself better for that? And learning which bits that I take responsibility for myself, but when I can then lean on program
Yes.
manager who can actually
Yes.
support and to help that. And I think there's lots of learnings, Elizabeth. You know, we had this
Yeah.
conversation offline a little while ago, and
Yeah.
I felt so strongly that your approach to what it always has been, but your approach to all of this is, what can I learn? How can I do this better? And this understanding, I'm not going to get it right straight away, but I'm going to
Yeah.
keep going. And I think that's really important. I think people come to us, or they come to experts, or people with experience, um, and they want a checklist. They want a checklist against the ISO. They want a way of doing stuff. They want a policy.
Yes.
That is not what this is about. Like, every
Mm.
company, every company travels for different reasons. There might be some common things, but generally, it's about your culture, and it's
Yeah.
about understanding how you can align travel to fulfill the
Mm.
goals, objectives of the
Mm.
organisation, right? As
Yeah.
opposed to this cost of control that we put
Yeah.
somewhere else.
Yeah.
But I'm just really conscious. So, are there any other top tips that you can share with our listeners about
Yeah.
how you do some of your engagement, or quite honestly, Elizabeth, anything else that you want to share with us?
Um, well, I think that, if I want to summarize, what I think is the most important is the way of communication that we were just talking about. And I know how difficult it can be when you don't have that. And I know how good it can work when you do have that. So I've worked with both. And at the moment, I'm rather on the end of, I don't have that anymore. So I'm really missing it. And I can really see what a difference it makes as well. So that's a work in progress for now again. The other one, I think that's, I've already spoken about that as well, is knowing who your travelers are, using the data that you have available to you to support that, and also working with your stakeholders and really understanding the roles of each of those. So I think that comes into just, how to support your travelers at all parts of the journey. And the other thing is also investing in learning, because you need to do that if you're going to be working with travel risk. There's so much to learn. And, you can invest in learning in many different ways, in doing formal training, which I think is invaluable, and also by talking to your colleagues, to your peers, really, who have that experience. You can learn so much for them, and always to be open to that. I'm still learning. You sometimes think you've done quite well and you know a lot, but there's always so much more to learn, and just to be open to that, and to look at the lessons that you have learned along the way, to be really open about your learning. And it's the only way that you can really improve what you have in place. The other thing, of course, that we've said people struggle with are the resources, the time. They're not always there, so you have to work out a way that it works for you and your company. And I think as well, this is where, the senior management support comes into place. We need that in place, because otherwise we can't provide the service that we want to provide, that many of us, really, really want to provide, but we simply don't have the resources for them. So having an advocate for your department in the company is really useful, if you can get that support. And also get your medical and security provider maybe to come in and talk to top management about that, and the reason why you need that support.
Lots of top tips. Thank you. So I think what I'm hearing here, just to summarise, is this isn't always about big budgets and technology. We all know
Yeah.
that everyone's going to be starting this journey at a different place, but communication is loud and clear. And actually, if you've got
Mm.
nothing else in place as a company, if you're a small SME, but
Yes.
you've got something in place that allows your management knows where you are when you're traveling, and you're communicating and having that conversation backwards and forwards, I'm telling you, you're possibly doing better than some of the big, large corporations right now, because they haven't
Yeah.
necessarily got that. So this is not about big budgets as much as everyone thinks it is. Yes, it can be. Right at the beginning, this is about you looking out there and understanding your company, what it is that that company needs, and then putting some stuff around it. Some of it's soft, some of it more technology. So Thank
Right.
you so Thank you so much for joining us today, Elizabeth. I could continue this conversation a lot longer, and we do outside of this. But thank you so much for sharing your experience. I think our listeners are going to find this really, really valuable. Anything else you want to add before we close?
No, I mean, I could talk on this subject forever because it's something that I just really am passionate about, that I'm really interested in. There's always something to learn, and it makes my day so diverse as well. There's a lot of responsibility involved in it as well, and you have to be open to that responsibility. But there are supports there, and I think sharing that responsibility is really important and invaluable for your travelers. So that's all. And and as always, thank you for your support, and that also helps me do my job better. With a lot of the resources that I've also have from the Travel Risk Academy, they're fantastic, and they really help me to know that I'm also on the right track.
Well, I'll take that little shout out at the end. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Much appreciated. Um,
No, fantastic.
Well, thank you. And actually, Elizabeth has done some reviews on some of the products, so it is worth having a little nose at some of that stuff if you go onto the Travel Risk
Yeah.
Academy site. On that note, though, thank you so much for joining us. So, to our listeners, you have been listening to Bex Deadman. This is Talking TRM, the podcast dedicated to travel risk management. You've been listening to our guest, Elizabeth Anderson. Thank you so much for joining us. And until next time, please stay safe.